Everyone. I am Aaron Blumberg, Swiftland's Continuing Education Coordinator, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to DigiRef Academy Religion, It's a Question of Faith. We have a wonderful learning opportunity ready for you this morning with Dr. Stephanie Rollins. Dr. Stephanie Rollins is the Chief of Information Services at Muir S. Fairchild Research Information Center. She is also an adjunct digital reference professor for the University of Alabama. Stephanie serves on both regional and state library committees, and she has 22 years of experience in academic and special libraries. She holds a bachelor's in English from Auburn University, a master's degree in library service, and a doctorate in public administration, both from University of Alabama. Please welcome Dr. Rollins and enjoy her webinar this morning. Dr. Rollins?
Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me all right. Okay, great, fantastic. I'm delighted today to talk to you a little bit about faith and religion. Not typically a sermon that I'm going to give, but whenever you're dealing with patrons in a digital environment, it's very important to be able to find religious information for them. And so today's agenda is going to focus on that, just, regardless of what faith you are or are not. We need to be able to help people and be inclusive of their beliefs and find information for them. It doesn't depend on the topic specifically. We need to be able to help them with what they're seeking. So, just a little bit about me. I did not grow up in a church, and so I'm not a religious expert, but I know that I need to educate myself so that I can find people the information that they need. I came to the church late in life. I was baptized when I was 43, which is probably unusual for a lot of people, but again, just whatever your faith is, um, I appreciate that, and just giving you a little bit about me because I don't have a strong religious background in sources, but again, like I said, I need to be able to help people. And one of the things I did do is I worked at Samford, which had a divinity school. So that's kind of how I became educated on a lot of the sources, probably a lot more advanced sources than we're going to go over today. We'll talk about a couple of them. But that was kind of how I discovered a lot about religion resources, and eventually I was able to teach resources to divinity students. So that's just a little bit about my background, and I'm hoping that I can help you discover some great resources. I would be remiss, however, if I didn't talk to you about digital reference and the reference interview, because for me, and my students will tell you this when I teach them digital reference, you can't have the sources without the process, without the reference interview. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Mostly I'm just going to review because I talked a lot about it in the last session. If you want more information about that, the slides are up on Swiftland. But let's get to today. So today, I just want to kind of establish what is religion, why should we promote it in libraries, and what are some typical questions of faith. How can we become effective with digital reference? What does that cycle of digital reference look like? Um, Again, like I said, the importance of the reference interview, and I'll give you a really quick mnemonic so that you can kind of think about how to quickly do your chats, the process, some of the resources, a little bit about searching efficiently, and then I wouldn't be a good teacher unless I gave you some homework. Now, the homework is optional, but I thought that it would give you some ways to practice. If you're like me, if I attend a webinar and then I don't have an assignment, it's like, okay, that was great, but how am I going to use it? So I like to give you something an activity that you can use yourselves so that you can practice. Okay, so when we talk about religion, it goes straight to Merriam-Webster. It's got several different beliefs. Chocolate could be your religion. There's nothing wrong with that. But for Merriam-Webster, the service and worship of God or the supernatural. It could be a personal set of institutionalized system of religious attitudes, beliefs, and practices, or it could simply be a cause, principle, or system of belief held with ardor or faith. When you look at the religion in libraries Q&A, there's a great website on that. Um, They say it's more of a formal system of beliefs and practices and informed individual spiritualities. It could also be the older religions, like for instance the major religions like Catholicism, Judaism, Buddha. It could be something like that. It could be newer. Some people call these cults. Again, I don't get into any kind of judgment about that, but that could be paganism, Wicca, different things like that. Or no religion. Some people don't believe, and some people are agnostic. They just don't care. So, just kind of establishing what we talk about when we use the word religion. And should we promote religion? Absolutely, just like any other resource. And another thing, I'll get into this later with some of the statistics, but I looked up Lee County to see how many people believed in religion, period. And 38% of the population in Lee County believe in some form of religion or practice. So that's something to keep in mind when you're building your collections, when you're thinking about serving people, that kind of thing. And we should provide access to these materials, or at least, make them available either in your collection or maybe digitally. And why should we do that? We know this, just like with any other subject. It's our duty to do so professionally. And we should be inclusive more than exclusive. And of course, our collections should reflect our community. And if you look at the Library Bill of Rights, we want to provide access, of course, without particularly endorsing one faith over the other. So, if your county is mostly Catholic, of course you're going to have Catholic resources, but you'd also have other religions as well, and things maybe on paganism or different resources that kind of reflect the broader um, religious beliefs in your state. So just looking, and these are just some sample questions of faith, because when you're talking about trying to find religion resources, you don't really know, well, what does that mean? What kind of questions might we get? And I'm sure you guys have gotten questions on religion. I know you have. One of the things when I was looking at trying to do searches in some of the sources I'm going to show you is I was just doing a quick search on religion, and one of the questions I saw was, was Jesus a real man? Because we know about him, after he died, but what was he like when he was alive? Was he really alive? And so how do you answer questions like that? So these are just some sample questions of faith, questions about the Bible. Some of them are kind of quick, ready reference questions, and some of them are kind of a little bit longer. What's the first book of the Bible? That's kind of a trivia question. That's really quick and easy. Um, but like what, you know, what kind of things as far as society? So if we look at some of the other questions, um, you know, or if you're looking for statistics, or if you're looking for, things like what does the Constitution say about religion? That's a much longer involved question. Um, you know, what are the Greek gods? Those are kind of longer reference questions. And so some of the sources I'm going to show you today are going to help with that. And the other thing I think about when you're trying to do digital reference for religion resources, especially somebody like me that didn't have a huge religious background, is having those sources ready for you. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But so how can you become effective with religion digital reference? First and foremost, you've got to have great digital reference skills, and that includes focusing on the reference interview, technical and communication skills, and then you've got to have some knowledge of religion resources, or at least a quick list of where you can go for things that are on a religious topic. And you can become effective. You can have happy patrons on this topic. And when I talk about technical and communication skills, again, that's speaking to the webinar I did last time, but there are things like, knowing how to use the chat software, being able to type quickly, um, knowing how to email the results, getting a transcript, communication, of course that gets back to the reference interview, and then reference skills, again, knowing your resources. And just real quickly, how does this fall into effective reference in the digital environment? If you assess your skills, you do a great reference interview, You have that flow and that process down. You pick the right resources. You have a strategy for searching effectively, and then you continuously evaluate yourself. This is kind of how you can become great at digital reference. And of course, all of this centers around practice. So that's digital reference in a nutshell. I'm just giving this to you. One of the things I talk about later with homework is evaluating your chats. This is actually online, so if you want to have a kind of like a rubric to evaluate how you're doing on your chats when you partner with someone, or you're just looking at your own chat, excuse me, sorry about that, um, or if you're just looking at your own chats, this is kind of what I make my students do when they do digital chats, and it's just a really helpful, very quick way to look at how your chat is effective or what you might need to work on. And this is available on the web. You can look at it anytime. So just very quickly, the reference interview, we all know what this is. You know, it's that interpersonal communication between two people in any format, telephone, electronically, digital, screen sharing, whatever it might be. And so some of the best ways to be effective in the reference interview is, of course, to be approachable and welcoming, show interest, pay attention, clarify and verify, of course, formulate a search strategy and share it with the user if it's appropriate, follow up, and conclude the interview. So one of the things I want to share with you, and I'm going to kind of speed through this, but I just want you to, if you've ever seen the movie Karate Kid, this is kind of the reference Zen, and this is from Taikenson, and he's developed this kind of reference interview Zen, kind of like the 4 R's, the in school, sorry, the 3 R's in school, reading, writing, and arithmetic. These are kind of the 4 R's for the reference interview. So, kind of like when in the Karate Kid, if you guys remember that, kind of the wax on, wax off, this is just kind of the process that will help you have an effective reference interview. So the first thing you want to do is reassure, you want to respond, you want to reflect, and then you want to repeat the process. So I'm going to go into these very quickly. So the first thing you want to do is reassure the patron. You're not really trying to answer the question right away. What you want to do is make sure that they feel like their question is important, because a lot of times they have a lot of anxiety about coming to the reference desk in person or asking this question over chat. So some of the things you can say are, yes, I can help you. That's a great question. I'm sure we can find something. Just something to reassure them. That's the first thing you want to do. And then the second thing is you want to respond. And as you know, most patrons don't always ask the real question. You kind of have to figure that out as you go, and that's part of the heart of the reference interview. So you want to spend some time with the patron so that you can save that time so when you're searching, your searches are more effective. So just very quickly, it's so important to know how to ask people questions. And if somebody's come to you either in person or in a chat session, they've picked you. They've decided that they can't do it on their own. So this is special, at least to me. So you want to begin a dialogue. So, for instance, somebody might ask, where are the periodicals when they actually want, statistics on the Dow? And so it's just trying to figure out how to ask them to get to their real question. So some of the things you can do are you can alternate asking open-ended and closed-ended questions. Open-ended is how you can kind of ferret out more details about what they're asking you. For instance, like, where have you looked so far? How much material do you need on this topic? What would you like to find more about? Tell me more about that. Kind of like when you're dealing with a teenager and you ask them, what was your favorite part about your day at school? They're not going to answer with yes or no. They're going to give you a little bit more details. At the same time, however, you do also want to ask closed-ended questions, which are kind of like yes or no, so you can narrow it down. So have you looked in this? Do you want books or articles? Do you want current or historical information? Those are more closed-ended questions. And then neutral questions. One of the things to focus on is you know, make sure that you're neutral when you're asking questions so the person doesn't feel like, they're uncomfortable. Like, why do you need that? It's not a good way to ask. But maybe, how do you plan to use that information? And again, a neutral way can sometimes elicit more information. And sometimes using would instead of could. I absolutely learned that and do that in my emails. It sounds more welcoming than could ya? Could you just do that for me? It just doesn't, it just sounds a little bit better, which is weird, but it works. It absolutely does. So the third part of the reference interview is to reflect. So once you think you know what they're looking for, and again, standard disclaimer applies because you may have to do this again and again to get to the real question, and you kind of just reflect and you say, so if I understand you correctly, you're looking for, and it kind of restates the question for them and makes sure that you've got it right. And then you repeat this practice. And again, this is independent of the medium that you're using. It can be a digital reference, it can be in person, it can be the telephone. So I just want to run through a sample dialogue with you. This is just using the 4 R's, and I asked the member the question about, was Jesus a real man? And so this just kind of goes quickly through the process. One of the things that Luli and Aaron asked me to do was to take a question and break it down. How do you do that? So I can give you the 4 R's, but I feel like just giving you a quick example of how you might do a chat with this question would be helpful. And I give you kind of in italics what's going on here. So, for instance, the first thing I did was, I greeted the customer. And to me, it's very important, if possible, if you can use names, because in a digital chat, it helps to make it more personal. Because sometimes if you don't use names, it can sound really robotic. So the first thing I did was I, asked a friendly greeting. And the person says, "Oh, I need to find some information on Jesus." So they're not, they're really not asking me the question that I'm telling you about. Um, and so what I do first of all is I don't say anything. I just say that's a great topic, so I'm reassuring the patron. And I say, what kind of information on Jesus are you looking for? So again, that gives me the ability to ask an open-ended question and hopefully get some more info, because right now this is a huge topic. And so the patron says, well, I need information on his life. Okay, that's, still pretty huge if you had to ask somebody about your entire life, childhood. What exactly are you talking about? And so I said, we have a lot on Jesus's life. Again, reassuring him, is there any specific topic that you need? So again, another open-ended question trying to corral this topic here. But still reassuring him that we've got something, but there's still just a big question. And so he said, I want to find out if Jesus the man existed. So they've narrowed it a little bit more. And again, I reassure him, saying, yes, we can find that. And I'm asking a little bit more of a couple of closed-ended questions, books, articles, or websites. And, is there a time period that you're seeking? And really, they don't know. They just said anything would be great. I just want to find out if there's any real resources that back up that Jesus really lived and his early life before crucifixion. So a little bit more, little breadcrumbs here. And so this is where you would, reflect and restate the question. So you would like to find resources on Jesus' life as a man before crucifixion. And if you're doing that in person, it kind of seems repetitive, but in a chat, it works. Um, and the person says, yes, that's it. And so the person is excited that they'll be able to get an answer. And then one of the things I stress with my students, because you never know where somebody's asking a question from unless you have your chat service locked down to just your library. But a couple of things that will save you and the patron time is to, without being creepy, ask, hey, what's your closest library? And, well, how much time do you have available today? Because some people expect an answer in 3 minutes. So if they do, this is at the point where you could table it, give them your email address. The other thing that I like to do is with technology, sometimes you can get disconnected. And so I always give them my email early on. And so again, you're confirming how much time the user has and what library resources. And so of course this person uses the Lee County Public Library and they have plenty of time, which is fabulous. So a couple of things, you might read again to pick up with the chat. I know just where to find information on Jesus' life as a man. Let's start with, and maybe you give them a website or maybe the first thing you may want to do is do a Google search. And with Google, you can copy the entire URL where you've done your search, the entire web address, and you can paste that into a chat, and the patron can click on it, and they can see exactly what search terms you used. And so what my students call this is they call it give them something to chew on. So you give them something to look at while you're searching. And then the other thing is I always tell them how long I'm going to be searching. So I give them something to work with, and then I say I'm going to be about 2 minutes and I'll be right back. And so the patron may say, yes, this is on the right track. And then, you would interact depending, maybe 4 or 5 sources. And then one of the things you need to do is you need to be able to close because it can go on indefinitely. One of the things you can look at is if you start getting short responses from the patron, like, okay, you know that it's kind of time to close, but you want to ask to be sure. And so one of the things that you can do is ask them if they have enough resources to get started. And so this verifies if they're satisfied or not. And the patron can say, yes, thank you. And if they're not, then of course, you can repeat the 4 R's. You can, again, restate the question, talk about, reflect and talk about what else they might need with open-ended and closed-ended questions, and kind of repeat that process. But then you want to have a great closing. Again, what I like to do is tell them my name and my email, and make that personal connection. This may be the only time that somebody uses your library. And then, of course, the chat ends. You do the closing. So just kind of a quick breakdown of how you might do a question. I don't know a lot of places that actually do that unless you look at your own transcripts, that kind of thing. But again, it just takes practice to get good at doing digital reference, and then specifically religion resources. And the thing to be careful about is with religion is you of course want to be inclusive. You don't want to make anybody feel uncomfortable that they're basically that their religious beliefs don't have merit. And the way to do that is to kind of remain neutral and reassure them that you can find them the information that they need. One of the things you can do that's really effective in digital reference is to use scripts. And so a lot of the things that I used in that dialogue would actually be scripts that I would cut and paste. And for instance, where I say, hello X, my name is Stephanie, I'm a librarian at Sanford, how can I help? I'd paste that in and of course change the X to the person's name. So one of the things you can do is in your chat software you can have this, or you can have this as a Word doc. This is just a quick tip to kind of help make it faster. Okay, so I wanted to spend about 25% of our time on the digital reference process because I think that if you don't have that when you're trying to help someone with the right resources, you can give them the right resources all day long, but if you don't have that effective reference interview skills, those communication skills, it just kind of falls apart. Because we know our resources, it's just communicating those to the reference, in the reference interview to the patron that sometimes is difficult. And on the other hand, you can't have the process without the resources. So if you don't know your resources, that can kind of inhibit the process of the chat. So right now we're going to talk a little bit about picking the right resources. And specifically religion. So we'll talk a little bit about the Florida Electronic Library, some subject-specific subscription databases, but primarily I'd like to focus on some of the things out there that are free, because in these times with these budgets, it's really hard for a lot of libraries to afford these subscription databases. They're wonderful, but they cost a lot of money and they just seem to keep going up. So I'm also going to talk a lot about some general websites, books, articles, statistics, and primary resources in the area of religion. So first up, I want to focus a little bit on your Florida Electronic Library, which I believe most everybody has access to in Florida, if it works like it does here in Alabama. So one of the things I want to talk to you about that you guys have, and again, hopefully I'm not stating the obvious, but there's a couple of things that you have at your fingertips that would be fantastic to use. You've got the Gale Religion and Philosophy database, which this is directly from your site, that talks about some of the beliefs in religion, some of the different religions and philosophy and how they impact our daily lives. Um, of course, there's the Gale databases that you have that are Expanded Academic Index, ASAP. You've got some scholarly magazines and newspapers. So you guys have got two great resources that the state of Florida, or yeah, state of Florida pays for. Also, you guys probably have OCLC. There's some databases there. Some of the college libraries and special libraries in your area may have ProQuest or ProQuest Religion, which is about 150 journals. Some of you guys have JSTOR, which is fantastic for archival articles. They're a little bit dated, but for the topic of religion and some of the research people are doing, it's great. More of, kind of a college or maybe high school students level. But they also have a religion and theology collection, which is about 80 titles. Of course, where would we be without EBSCO? Again, their general databases are great. And then they also have a religion and philosophy collection, which is about 200 full-text magazines and journals, and they start in 1911. So those are some of the databases that might be available to you. I don't have access to any of those, but I did want to mention some of the things that you could highlight for your patrons. Now, switching to some of the really kind of gold standards for the topic of religion, and more on a college level. Gale is fantastic. They do have some scholarly. These databases are specifically kind of at a higher level. I put a star by ATLA. This, if you had to pick one, if you have a college library, this is the best one I've ever seen. It's got topics like biblical studies, world religions, church history, and religion and social issues. It has 1.3 million bibliographic records. It has religion in over 60 languages. It has about 460,000 article citations. So it's just really fantastic. And if I had the money for something, one database, it would be ATLA. So this is something you may want to look at. And the great thing about this one, I learned when I was at Stanford, is you can take a verse of scripture and search for articles based on that exact verse, which was kind of interesting. The next one I want to talk to you about is Philosopher's Index. And again, this is strictly an index. It's not full text, but it's got a lot of information about philosophy of law, religion, science, history, education, and language. And it's from 1940 to the present. I forgot to mention the ATLA is from 1949 to the present. And then there's also religious and theological abstracts. And this provides summaries of articles in scholarly journals. So it's kind of like a literature review. And they have a lot of periodical articles, Christian, Jewish, other world religions, and they also provide English language abstracts of articles in English, Hebrew, Afrikaans, and major European language. So that can be super helpful. So these are some of the, if you had the money and you had that dream, what might you buy? And again, I don't have access to those, but those are just three that I think are just fantastic. And again, my hope here is I'm not trying to give you every single religion website database under the sun because nobody has time for that. I just want to give you some to choose from so when you have this topic of religion, you can kind of make your own cheat sheet on things that you want to use. So again, like I said, I try to focus on free sites because, for instance, my library is a federal library. We're not going to have a huge religion collection. So some of the things that I might set to the side to use are again some of these free resources. So a couple of things I want to talk to you about are some of the general websites that are just fantastic. And I'm going to show you a couple of them, not going to show you all of them, but you'll have the links, you'll have the description, so you can go back and visit every single one of these on the web if you would like to. So the first one I want to talk about is the Internet Guide to Religion. And this is kind of a search engine. It's kind of an annotated guide to a variety of electronic resources. You can limit to websites, bibliographies, syllabus, reference resources, and there's even software. And so this is kind of a really neat one, and I'll show that to you. The second one I'm not going to show you, but it's super easy to get to. It's the best of the web and religion and theology from the New York Public Library, but it's more of an alphabetical list. Not as exciting as some of the sites here, but it does have a lot of what kind of people that they serve look for the most. So it's got kind of a great list of resources. Of course, you probably know about the Internet Public Library, and it's not really added to anymore, but all the links still work as far as I can tell. And so it's a list of, again, websites that librarians have looked at and evaluated on religious topics. I'm going to show you kind of what that one looks like. There is a religious studies web guide. This is kind of a little bit different. It's not really, it does have a search function, but it's more organized by type of resource, and it's put together by the University of Calgary and the Library of Congress. So it's a great source to look at. Um, there is actually a Religion Explorer search engine. I'm going to show you a little bit about what that looks like. And it searches only in religion-related sites. And then the Bible Gateway. This is a fantastic source for when you get that question about, I need to find quotes on, I need to find scripture on grace, or I need to find out, scripture that mentions hope, or whatever it might be. It's 180 online Bibles, and it's in 70 different languages. So if you ever get a Bible question about, I need to verify that this is the verse, this is the perfect place to go. Okay, so I wanted to go live, but I have so many problems with delays with live. So I've done some screen captures to kind of show you some of these sources. So the first one I want to show you is called the Wabash Center. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly. And this is a fabulous resource. It's kind of a meta site where it's got a lot going on. You can search by personal headings, some subject headings. So if you look at the website, there's a humongous list, and all of these are where it says like best of the web, um, religious thought, um, aspects of religion. These are all subject headings that you can click on. You can look at things by type. Again, you can search for syllabus. What I did was an advanced search. I'm a little bit impatient researcher, so I wanted to kind of look to see if there was anything on, again, that aspect of Jesus's life, him as a human, as a man, that kind of thing. And so I actually did an advanced search. And so what I did was I just actually, with this one, you kind of have to play with it. I just actually looked for Jesus Christ, and what I found was when I did a search is I just kept Jesus Christ and I did all. There are a couple things. For instance, this From Jesus to Christ, the story of the storytellers. That's something I might want to look at. And then there's also this portrait of Jesus from Galilean Jew to the face of God that looked great. There's a Christian history timeline. So I would encourage you to explore this. Some of the options you have is you can search within the results. Um, Again, up here at the top, it says after where it says search within results, it says all. There you can search for syllabus, which sometimes will lead you to a free course. You can look for e-texts, books. You can look for journals. Hopefully you can see this. You can look for websites, bibliographies. So you can select which options you're most interested in. So again, for somebody just getting started on trying to answer this question, these are a couple sources that you might want to look at. The other thing over here is you'll notice that it says sort and there's a little red star. If you have this live and you click on it, it will bring the top sites to the top. So instead of getting a list of, everything and trying to sort through it, you can actually click on the star and it'll bring all the starred ones to the top, which is kind of neat. So it saves you a little bit of time. Okay, so the next site I want to talk to you about is the Internet Public Library. I think this is overlooked because it's not really added to anymore. But when I went to it, surprisingly enough, one of the top sites that they recommended was that Wabash Center Guide to Internet Resources, which was great. The other thing, over here you'll see this big red arrow. When you click on these different links here, for instance, faiths and denominations, leading figures, religion blogs, sacred and other religious texts, they all go to different pages and have some fantastic resources. So this is just something, again, a kind of a general website that might be helpful when you're trying to answer some of these questions. The next thing I wanted to show you was the Bible Gateway. So one of the things that I find interesting in faith is this aspect of grace. And so I wanted to look for quotes on grace. If you look here to the right of my search term grace, there's a little drop down that says which kind of Bibles, which kind of languages. So I just picked the easy to read version, but you can actually check which Bible and which language you want. There's also a really nice text size increaser here, which is great if you have patrons that have trouble with small print. And so when I did a search for grace, it this is it said there's 97 results 1 through 25, and it picks up this first quote here. There's some different quotes. There's some proverbs. Over to the right hand side, you can actually filter by the different the Old Testament, the New Testament, Acts, different things here, and it will actually pull those up. And again, this is a free site. Just kind of really nice if you get those quick reference questions about the Bible and you don't know your Bible, which I'm still kind of learning. So that's just a quick way to kind of get that. So the next thing is a lot of our patrons want electronic books. I want a book on this. I want something I can read and look at. I don't just want you to Google it for me. I want more. I want more sites. I want to get some books. So there's a few book sites that I want to highlight to you, and again I'm going to show you a few that are kind of my favorite. There's the Christian Classics Ethereal Library, and they have free copies of Christian scripture and literature texts. It's a great site, and I'm going to show you that one. There's what a lot of people refer to as the DOAJ, which is the Directory of Open Access. I'm sorry, I guess this would be a DOJB. There's also one for journals, but this is specifically on religion. It's kind of hit or miss depending on your topic, so we'll look at that. Another one I really like is this Global Digital Library on Theology. It's got about 650,000 journals, books, and other items relating to theology. And it's the one thing about this is you do have to register for a free account. It took me literally about 30 seconds, and it was painless. Of course, Google Books, but I want to show you a little bit about this advanced search. Again, most free books are going to be pre-1923, but I have seen some more recent books when I was doing my search. HathiTrust, I'm sure you guys are familiar with. It's got content from research libraries, also things from Google Books, and again, only public domain books will be full text. The Internet Archive, I think people kind of forget about this, but it offers, archived information about 281 billion pages. So again, this might be something you'd want to look at. And then the Intra-Text Digital Library. This has some full texts from Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, and Islam. So there's some actual free texts, and I'll show you that one. And then if you have people specifically focusing on the New Testament and the Old Testament, this may be more kind of on a college level. There's some reading rooms, and they've got some partial books that are digitized, and if that's something that somebody's studying, it's a really great site. Also, there is the University of Pennsylvania. They have over 1 million free books on the web, and you can actually browse by subject. When you click on Browse by Subject, there's a heading for religion, theology, click on that and it'll list some of the books. Princeton, I'm going to show you this one. I really like this one. It's called A Theological Commons, and it has almost 80,000 books and journals on theology and religion. And so there's also about 26,000 volumes from the seminary library. So again, depending on what kind of level of research your patron is doing, this may be too much for them, but it's also got some basic texts in there that I think are really great. And then getting back to the Wabash Center, they also have online books, and we looked at that one already. But there's a lot of 200 books or so are on there, so I think that's a great place to go back to as well for books. So this is the CCEL, and this is again, looking at sources, books, different things like that. And so you can find a book, you can study your Bible, you can meditate. Of course, they'd love for you to give them money. And one of the things I did is took the aspect of, the life of Jesus and did a search on just simple. I changed it up throughout the presentation, Jesus and life, Jesus and man, just looking on Jesus Christ. So again, thinking about your search strategy is kind of important because here I've got these slides and it kind of looks like, oh, great, she found something immediately. But of course, sometimes you have to redo your search a couple of times. So I am just like you. I'm not perfect with my searches. So again, this is just to kind of show you how things work. So what I did was I did a search for Jesus and life, and it came out with these 3 books, and they are all completely full text. And the 3 that came back were Life of Jesus Christ in its historical connection and historical development. Sounds really good to try and determine, was Jesus a real man? Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah. That also sounds good. The third one, maybe not so much, Meditations on the Life and Passion of our Lord Jesus Christ. But it might be worth looking at. So that was just a really quick search. You can search within books. You can look at titles and authors. It looks like you can also search for scripture. And it looks like you can also search for subject tags. So again, it's kind of a neat source. I would definitely recommend that one. Again, the next one I was talking to you about earlier is the Global Digital Library on Theology. And it's, again, one that you have to register, but it's free to register. These are some of the things you can do there. They've got databases. You can search journals, of course, and special collections. So it's kind of a library, but it's fantastic for books. This is just a search, again, I did on Jesus and man. And the search engine you kind of just have to play with a little bit to kind of figure it out. It's not difficult, but what happens is it's full text, and again, it's free. So again, I did my search for Jesus and man, and the third one down I found was called The Man Jesus Christ, and you can see it actually gives me the full PDF once I click on it. It gives you a date range, which you can sort by. You can sort by title. A couple more down, Jesus as the Son of Man in Mark, which is kind of more scripture, which is not exactly what we're looking for. But you can look at some different things here, and again, the full text is available. Google Books, everybody knows Google Books, but I don't know if you're aware that there's actually an advanced search for Google Books. And it just makes it a lot easier. You don't have to know all the code to kind of put it in to make it do what you want, like quotation marks. It can be much faster, I think, to use. And just in case you can't read this, you've got the options of find results with all the words, again, exact phrase, at least one of the words, without the words. So for instance, for this one, if I wanted to do without the word scripture, because I'm more looking for Jesus as a real man, that could be something I could do. The next field is search, and you can select all books, limited preview and full view only, and when you do full view only, that means you get the entire full text. If you do limited, you'll get some partial views of the book, but then it cuts you off. All books is going to be everything. So when I did my search, I actually selected full view only. and that way I was able to get the full text of the items. Again, it's just a judgment call. They also have content. For this, I actually selected books. It's not highlighted here. You can actually look for books with the title, author, publisher, subject. So for subject, I typed in religion. You can look at publication date. If you have an ISBN or ISSN and you want to see if possibly something in here is free, you can do that. So for my advanced search, I did Jesus as man in quotes, which is not really a perfect search. And then it put in the keyword of religion, and then I had said that I wanted full view books. So a couple here that look positive are this first one, The Man of Galilee, a biographical study of the life of Jesus Christ. That might be a good one. Um, and so if you had a chance to scroll down, which you can't here, you'd see there are a couple other books as well. So again, kind of taking advantage of that Google Advanced search might be something that would be helpful to you. Getting to the Theological Commons. Again, this is from Princeton. You can browse by author, collections, different things. And then at the bottom of their page, they've got this neat section that has date, format, language, and subject. And if you click on select on any one of these, it'll give you a huge screen with things, subject headings or dates that you can select. I just decided to do a search up here instead with keyword anywhere. And I did a search, for, of course, again with Jesus, man, life. And I came back with this book. I'm not sure if you can see it. It says, let me see, sorry. I'll read it to you because I can barely see it. It makes things really small on here. So the book that I found, and it's actually the entire book, is An Outline Life of Jesus Christ, a brief statement of the events in the early life of Jesus, which sounded perfect for this patron who is looking for what we want. So if just to kind of, and the full text of the book is actually there, and it's free. So you can kind of look through this book, you can page through it. I just thought this was fantastic. This may answer the person's question. Again, it took me literally 3 seconds to find this book. So again, just kind of something that you might want to look at. Okay, so switching to articles, because sometimes people don't want an entire book, they just want a short article. Again, the DOAJ, the Directory of Open Access Journals, and this specifically again takes you to religion if you follow these steps. So once you go to this website, you click on philosophy, psychology, and religion, and then it'll open a directory of journals which you can search. Again, it's kind of hit or miss because what's there is free. So sometimes what you're looking for, you're not going to find. Again, what we just talked about, the Global Digital Library on Theology, they've got journals. And again, you do have to register for a free account. Of course, we all know about Google Scholar. Fantastic. You can add in your library under library links. If anybody needs to know how to do that, I can show you. But that way you can add in your library, but you can also add in some of the major libraries like maybe the Vatican or the Library of Congress. So you can actually pick libraries that have tremendous religious resources and search their library. And even if your library doesn't have it, sometimes it's there for free, but if your library doesn't have it, then of course they can do an interlibrary loan. I'm going to talk to you specifically about this Google custom search, and it's a custom search of theology journals, and the PDF files are there. Oester is from WorldCat. They have a lot of, again, fabulous resources, and everything there is available. And then the review of biblical literature. This is more if you are looking maybe for your collection or suggestions for books. This actually has book reviews as opposed to actual resources. But I mentioned that in case you're trying to kind of build a collection. Okay, so again, like I said, the DOAJ is kind of hit or miss. This, again, I did a search for, let's see, Jesus and human. Kind of mixed it up there. And this is kind of hard to read, I apologize. Let's see. Just 1 second. So here we've got it wasn't that great of a search, but maybe on another topic would be better. But they've got things like mission, identity, and ethics in Mark, Jesus, the patron for outsiders. There might be something there. Um, the last one on the page, fully human and fully divine, the birth of Christ and the role of Mary. That one might have something, but again, you kind of have to would filter a little bit and look through. Over on the left-hand side, they do have where you can filter again by different topics under religion, make it a little bit more specific. You can also look at language. I selected English, but they do have foreign languages in here, which is kind of neat. If you are looking, maybe somebody needs something in Latin, that's an option that you have based on the results. Okay, the next one I want to show you is this Google custom search, and it just searches theological journals. So for this one, I did Jesus and Human again, and the neat thing is, if you look right under the search where I've done Jesus and Human, you've got all Christianity, religious studies, cultural and scientific studies, so you can actually filter this a little bit. So these are subject headings that have come up, which of course we know can make our search a little bit better. So for this one, I found a couple of things that really looked kind of nice. Um, so of course there's a book review, but there's one, can the human character of Jesus be called divine? That might be helpful. Um, there's one towards the end, the religious significance of the humanity of Jesus. Those two might be really helpful. Again, this person is asking about the life of Jesus as a man, but maybe they're interested more about who he was as a person. So again, this might be something that would be helpful. So the next thing I want to talk to you about is a little bit about statistics. Whether you're trying to build a collection and you want to know what kind of faith-based population you have, or somebody wants to know what people believe statistically, or things like how many Catholics do I have? If somebody's trying to start a business and it's a faith-based business, maybe they would like to know statistics for their county, for their state, that kind of thing. So the first one is my absolute favorite. It's completely free. It's not complicated like a lot of statistics sites. It's called the Association of Religion Data Archives. It's been around since 1997, and where they get their data is is fantastic. They don't actually list sources, but what they do tell us is, if you look under the About Us, it is just let me find my notes real quick. It is religion scholars and researchers in the worldwide. They also have international data, and you can make reports, you can make maps, you can make charts. It's just really a fabulous resource for statistics about beliefs or religion, congregations. It's just, you can tell I really like it, and it's one that you should have in your back pocket. The next one, of course, the religion from the census. Under the population report, there's tables on religious bodies, preferences, church membership, and attendance. So that may be something you want to look at. There's a social survey, and this is kind of an ongoing sociological survey, and it collects data from the public. And to get to it, you have to actually go to where it says religion in the filter by subject box. And you don't even have to put in a search, and it will give you every single statistic they have, like on faith, different things like that. And you don't even have to search. It'll just bring back every statistic they have on religion if you put religion in the filter by subject box. There's a national congregation study that's being done by Duke, and it's kind of a representative sample of America's churches and places of worship. It's a really great site to look at for statistics. My other absolute favorite is this Pew Forum on Religion in Public Life. It surveys, gives you demographics, gives you maps. It's a survey, and what they've done is a United States survey on 35,000 people. And it tries to give you kind of a picture of the role religion plays in everyday life. So I'm going to show you that pretty quickly. So again, this is my absolute favorite. They also have tools for teachers and students. Again, public libraries, this would be a fabulous source for any type of library. They've got a data archive. Again, they've got international statistics, U.S. congregational membership, They've got religious groups, quick stats. You can make interactive timelines, and there's also GIS maps you can make. And these are some of the foundation that support the project. Again, but the teaching tools might be something that'd be really fabulous. For instance, if you're doing maybe a segment on religion and government, church and state for for public schools, maybe somebody has to do a report. You can actually search the ARDA, and so this is just kind of an outline of their site. So what I did, and you guys were probably wondering how I got that statistic on religion for Lee County, is I actually clicked on U.S. congregational membership, and I clicked on, let's see, reports. And what I did was, where it says find a report by zip code or city or state, you can click down here where it says counties. You can also do maps. And so you can also do a GIS map. And it's just really simple to use. You don't have to know statistics to do this. So what I did was I clicked on counties, and I actually did hopefully most of the counties of the people attending. You can tell me. Um, and what I did was once you click on counties, you can also click on a little button that says multiple counties. So what I did was I looked at religion congregations for all the counties for people attending today, and it gave me a kind of a graph that I thought was kind of interesting. And so you can see that it looks like, and tell me if you think this is right based on your experiences, but it looks like primarily Catholic for all of these counties. And again, this is based on 2010 data. Um, but you can see all the different counties. You could actually just look at your county to see what it is. And again, this is people that have attended church, and they've gotten data and statistics on it, um, and kind of made this graph for you. So it's really simple, easy to use. So next highest is the Evangelical Protestant, and of course you've got other, and you've got I guess 3 million. Is that 3 million? Yeah, that people that they don't have kind of any information on. And then when you look at maps, I just did a map for the state of Florida, and the key down here tells you how many congregations in each state. It doesn't tell you what type of religion, but as you can see, as you get closer, I think to Miami, there's a lot more congregations. Whereas you look at kind of further north, there's a lot less congregations. So it's kind of interesting to look at some of these things. The other thing they've got on here is if you look at, there's a tab that says Quick Stats, and I selected U.S. surveys. There's some attitudes about religion. You can do U.S. surveys, classic topics, U.S. congregation. The site also has tutorials, so if you are having trouble and struggling, like I said, I thought it was pretty straightforward, but maybe there's things that I could do that would be even more fabulous. So site tutorials might be helpful, but they've got things about attitudes and beliefs. So maybe if somebody wanted to know, what do people believe about the Bible? What denomination or affiliation? And so what I did is I clicked on classic topics, and there's one that I don't know if this would be helpful to answer our question, but this one is related to beliefs about Jesus, which I thought was kind of neat. And what this says, I'm sorry you probably can't read this, but you'll get the PowerPoint slides. But it talks about Jesus is a fictional character. So 1.4% people believe that. Jesus as the Son of God, 72% people believe that. So it's just kind of interesting to see what people believe, the different religious beliefs that they have. So it's not just statistics, but it's statistics also on beliefs. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So that may help answer some questions you get. My other favorite is, of course, everybody loves the Pew Research Center. They do things on, internet statistics, libraries. Of course, we love the Pew. And this is called the Religious Landscape Study. They do have a user guide. If you look here where this really pretty picture is, they've got a report about the demographics, and they've got a report about beliefs and attitudes where it's kind of all summed up. This right on the first page kind of gives you this, again, this survey of 35,000 people. How many people are Christian? How many people are, not don't have faith? How many people are, agnostic, atheist, whatever it might be? Other world religions, different things like that. And if you scroll down the page, they also have a map where you can explore religion data. So I just clicked on Florida, and you can look at more data on Florida, which is great. The next thing they have, again, kind of like the ARDA, they've also got different views on God, age, political party, different things like that, marital status as far as it kind of intersects with religion. And again, if somebody's starting a business, or if they're thinking about trying to do a debate, maybe these are some things that would give you some great statistics on what people believe. So I clicked on belief in God, and you can also, what's really nice is all of these images can be downloaded, so you can it displays nicely in a PowerPoint instead of trying to do kind of a screen capture. So people that are absolute, of these 35,000 people that they interviewed, 63% believe in God absolutely. 20% fairly certain, 5% not all certain, 1% not. I'm sorry, 1% it's kind of a Likert where it's kind of going down. 9% don't believe in God, and 2% don't know other, kind of that NA response. So it's kind of interesting if you're thinking about trying to frame, religious beliefs or a debate, or somebody looking at a business, or maybe a high school student wants to know, do people believe in God? This could be some ways that statistically you could kind of show that to them. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about, the last thing, is information on primary sources. So there's this really kind of cool site, because we talk a lot and we focus a lot on Christianity and the major world religions, but there's other religions out there that we, a lot of people don't often think about. And this first site is called From Primitives to Zen, and it's got text from a lot of the world's religions, things like the myths of the Australian Aborigines, Greek, Polynesian, Japanese. So it's kind of a really neat site for things that are kind of not specifically mainstream like we think about with religion. There's the Internet Sacred Text Archive, and this is free. It's nonprofit. One of the things I'll tell you when you first land on their page is they want you to buy a USB drive with all of the sources. But once you get past that, it just kind of, you're like, whoa, okay. But you can actually search for electronic texts on religion. And again, it has the major faiths, but it also has things on Wicca, on really different faiths. There's the digital collection from the Bavarian State Library, and this actually has digitized manuscripts, which are kind of really pretty and nice to look at. Again, depending on the level of research for your student, this may be way over the top. But maybe somebody wants an image of something or a picture. This may come in handy. And then there's the Biblioteca Religiosa Intratext, which is English, um, but it has a lot of, again, digital library books, and it's got a Creative Commons license, so you can actually use these resources. There's also the British Library's online gallery, and you can actually search for religion. It's got some beautiful text. The whole thing is there. There's the humanistic texts, and this is kind of a wide variety of religious and non-religious texts. And they've got some really useful introductions, but you can actually select the different kinds of topic areas that you might like. There's also the World Digital Library on Religion, and it's got different countries and cultures around the world, and it's actually got a digital library, again, full text. So just to take a little bit of a break, so I'm trying to show you things that would be helpful for everybody: college, public library, general public, that are free, because I feel like our budgets are just going to continue to decrease unless you're really lucky, and if you are, that is fantastic. But things are just, the publishers and the vendors are just keep increasing their prices, and I think that we need to be responsible and find things that people can get to on the web that are free, that help them no matter what. Okay, off my soapbox. So one of the first primary sources I wanted to show you is, again, is this Internet Sacred Text Archive. And when you first go to it, this is not the main page. This is actually their search page. You're kind of like, is this for real? It doesn't look quite scholarly or credible, but I promise there are some great sources there. So when I went here, I actually looked for the Internet Book of Shadows, um, which is kind of it hasn't been around that long, but actually the whole text is there, and you can search the catalog, their catalog of topics and everything. Um, Again, and they just try to bombard you with, hey, you could buy this, but actually you could just look at it online for free, so you don't have to buy anything. But you can also look for titles by keywords, authors, subjects, and then they have a complete title list. So they've got all the major religions. If you look over here to the left under topics, they've got the world religions, traditions, mysteries, different things like that. So the next site I wanted to show you was the Biblioteca Reload. Sorry, my Spanish is not that great. Biblioteca Religiosa Intratext. And as I said, things are in English. So, for instance, it's got a lot of the major religions here and the sources. It's broken down by subject here on the left-hand side. So you can look at the different Bibles, different resources. Um, this is their main page, and it's kind of broken. It is actually in Spanish, but when I looked for the different resources, depending on what I was looking for, there were several things in English. The next one I want to show you is the World Digital Library. This is fantastic for religious sources. You can limit by place. For instance, if you want to look at, this is after I've done a search, so it's limited to my search. But you can look at the different places, the time period. You can limit by topic, the type of item, the language, and the institution. So it pulls in some fabulous things. Again, I did my search for Jesus Christ and life. And there's a couple of things here that look really good. Um, the third one down, the book of the life and miracles of our Lord Jesus Christ in 2 languages. Um, Here's the second one, the life images of the life of Jesus Christ and the saints. Here's the book of the Passion of Saint Margaret and the Virgin with the life of Saint Agnes and prayers to Jesus Christ and to the Virgin Mary. Maybe not so much that one, but again, I might look at it. So these are just kind of 3 that I just picked, and of course there were more sources. There were actually, I want to say, 57. So I just kind of picked a few for you guys to see. And one of the neat things, this is the one that's the life of Jesus Christ. So they've actually scanned in the entire publication book. It's all here. This is not in English, but if somebody were to maybe doing a higher level research, again, I said there are English things here, but this is actually, of course, the primary source, the actual text, the actual language, which I think is fantastic to be able to look at online. So those are some of the sources that we've talked about. Just very briefly, one of the things that I would advocate to you is not to get overwhelmed by all the resources that I've shown you. And again, this is limited. There's a million sources out there on religion. But have just a few. Maybe you have a web page or a Word doc that's just for religion, and you list 4 or 5 of the sources that I've mentioned, and that can kind of get your patrons started. Or maybe you have a religion tab, in your browser, a web page that you've kind of made just straight text, that lists 4 or 5 of your top religion resources. Or if you have SpringShare and you can make a libguide. Maybe you make a guide on religion. Maybe it's for the public. Maybe it's just for use in-house. Those are things that you can do. Another thing that I like to do is have sources open in my browser, and there's a link here on this page that tells you how to do that. So a lot of times, you could have a kind of you can make a web link on your desktop that just opens religion resources. That's something that you can do. So again, with the digital reference skills and your technical and communication skills, that great reference interview, that process, that scripting, plus knowing a few religion resources and searching effectively, you can definitely become an expert at religion digital reference. And I feel like hopefully these are some sources. Like I said, one of the great things about attending a webinar is you won't get overwhelmed when you think about religion now, hopefully, because you've got a few sources that you can put in your back pocket. You don't necessarily have to know faith, you just have to know about how to find faith for people. So hopefully this is something that has been useful for you. Um, and I've got homework, like I said. So what I would like you guys to do, and maybe you take this back to your library with the PowerPoint presentation and you show it to the other people that you work with. But what I'd like for you guys to do is you can chat in Facebook, you can chat in instant messaging, Snapchat, whatever you like to do. But you have a chat with another person that you work with, and use the reference interview tips that I showed you, the open and closed ended questions, the restating the question, all those tips, plus the religion resources that you learned, and try to answer some of these questions. And some of them are really simple. So it'd be more about the reference interview process that you do. Some of them are a little bit more complicated because you would have to clarify, go back and forth with your customer, whoever decides to be the customer. And then if you evaluate your chats using that rubric I gave you, that online chat form, which is actually interactive, you can kind of ask yourself these questions and evaluate. The customer, the person who plays the customer, the patron can evaluate you, and you can go over it together. So there's some things. So again, questions about the Bible, about Christianity, Judaism, Mormonism. Those are questions that you could play with. You could look at some of the world religions. What's the religion of most people in India? That might be something you could use that statistical artist site for, because remember they have international statistics. Of course, you can always Google things, but I think it just shows more about what we can do if we find more specific sites than if we just Google something. Because anybody can Google, and when somebody's coming to ask you for help, they've probably already Googled it, maybe not effectively, but they're not going to want you to just Google it for them again a lot of times. Great sites in Google, you can start them with that. But then, of course, there are a lot better sites that we've talked about today that might be super helpful for somebody trying to answer questions. Of course, you can look at atheism and I can't say this word, people that don't care is what I've heard that term referred to as. You can look at religion in public life. Or you can take my question, is Jesus a real man? And hopefully today, by looking at some of the sources, we've kind of got a head start on where we might try and answer that question for the patron. Does anybody have any questions? We got about 10 minutes or so for questions. And my chat is kind of delayed, so if you're typing something, I can wait a second. Okay, well, if there's any questions that you have, I'm going to put well, you probably, my email is part of the presentation, but I'm going to put my email here. Sometimes I know some people don't like to type in chat, they don't like to ask questions, but later on they look at the presentation and they're like, hey, what in the heck was that? So I'm going to put my email here again. Please feel free to chat with me. You can email me if there's more clarification or you want me to show you something sometime. I'd be happy to do that. Hopefully, again, like I said, this has helped you out a little bit because, if I get a question about religion, sometimes I can get overwhelmed quickly because I don't have that background in faith, but I know how to do research. And so hopefully with these sites and maybe the process of chat reference will help you become more effective and not feel so anxious when you're trying to help somebody either in person or over chat or over the telephone. So thank you guys very much. If there's no questions, Aaron?
All right. Thank you, Dr. Rollins, for a wonderful webinar. Some information and a sneak peek of what is coming up. Attendees, if you enjoyed this webinar, be sure to join us on February 7th for DigiRef Academy Health and Medicine, Am I Dying? Also, please join us for SMILE, our Swiftland Management Institute webinar on building organizational reputation, which takes place on Wednesday, January 18th. When our opportunity knocks, Image is Everything on January 20th, and Kicking It Old School, Low-Tech Solutions in STEAM on January 27th. We encourage you to look at the upcoming webinars and workshops in months ahead and hope you're all able to join us for future training opportunities. As always, please feel free to keep checking the Swiftland CE calendar on the website, the Florida statewide training calendar, the Swiftland Facebook page, or look for your message from the Florida Library listserv. Thank you and have a wonderful day.